Well, good morning, everyone. How are y'all doing? You guys alive and well? Good, good. Well, it's good to see you. My name is Mark Canada. I'm one of the pastors here at Hill Country. And if you are a guest with us, we just want to say welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here today. You've picked a great week to be here because we are right in the middle of a series called Rearview, where we've been kind of investigating this guy named Solomon, who's known as the wisest man of all time. And we've been investigating this teaching, this letter that we have called Ecclesiastes, where Solomon is actually looking in the rear view mirror of his life. And as he looks in that rear view mirror, he's looking at this search that he had for satisfaction. He went after pleasure, he went after happiness, he went after meaning and purpose. And he's looking back on his life, and we're seeing this journey, this kind of adventure that he went on. And in his life, at this moment, he has a teaching, and this teaching is for his students. And as he's looking back, he's showing what it was that he went after, what he experienced, what he went through. And for us here, thousands of years later, we're looking at what he had to say because we believe that what he learned, what he experienced, what he went after can have an impact on our lives here today. Now, one of the reasons that I love this series is because I think we can all relate to this search for satisfaction. Isn't it true that in your life, like you go after this? You have dreams, you have desires, you have internal impulses that cause you to go after what is it in life that's going to bring you satisfaction? What is it that's going to help you understand your purpose and your meaning in life? Don't you have that internal pull? I think we all do. And I think one of the things that's amazing about this is that as we look at what our internal satisfaction is, when we look at that deeper meaning, it causes us to buy the things that we buy. It causes us to watch the things that we watch, to read the things that we read, to work on the things that we work on, to be in relationships with those that we're in relationships with, because there's this internal desire to go after what satisfies. And this isn't unique to you and me in this time of history. This has been true for all of history. Every single one of us is hardwired with this desire to pursue satisfaction. And one of the things that we saw in Solomon last week, and if you didn't get a chance to meet with us last week, I'd encourage you to go back online, watch from Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and then catch up with what we're doing here. But one of the things that we saw Solomon do is he painted this picture. We saw how he was confined in this time and space, but how God was outside of time and how he orchestrated all of time. But how when Solomon really began to zero in on what really satisfies, what we started to see was that in order to have satisfaction right here, right now, is only possible when we have a proper perspective of who God is and who we are in light of who God is. That we were encouraged that if we really want to find satisfaction in this life, then we need to become incredibly small and realize how great and awesome and powerful and majestic God really is. Because until we see him appropriately, until we understand who he really is, then we're never actually going to find satisfaction in the here and now, because he is the one who defines it. He's the one who reveals it. He's the one who shows us how to have it in the here and now. But there's a problem with that, right? I don't know about you, but I have a hard time in my life keeping that vision of God. I have a hard time in my life having that perspective of seeing God for all that he is, because I get so easily distracted. There are so many different things in life that come flying at me, and I'm sure you too, right? Because we get in the middle of life and there are all these different expectations and demands and things that we're going after, that to actually see God for all that he is, my heart is incredibly distracted. It goes in a million different directions based off of what's happening today and tomorrow and next week. And my mind and my heart just are just torn sometimes. Do you ever feel like that? That you want to have this right view of God so that you can have satisfaction in the moment, but there's this pull inside of you. There's this like gravitational pull that's getting you to a place where it's so hard to see God like that on a regular basis. And I really believe Solomon is keenly aware of this distraction. He is keenly aware of the pull of our hearts. Do you know why? Because he experienced it. He went through this. He knows what it feels like to have your heart kind of shredded in two, going after different desires, trying to find out where meaning and purpose is, but yet having that pulled in different directions. And I think one of the things that Solomon understood is how easy it is to have our satisfaction killed because we get so easily distracted. And I've got to wonder, and I've got to ask this question of ourselves, is if we could figure out, if we could understand what it is that's killing our satisfaction, what it is that's actually killing our purpose and joy and contentment, wouldn't you want to know? Wouldn't you want to know what it is so that you could not only identify it, but deal with it? That you could actually put a name to it so that you could hopefully remove it, get it out of the way so that you're not torn over what's really satisfying. I don't know about you, but I'd want to know that. And today, that's exactly what we're going to do, because Solomon, what he's going to help us to see are different areas of our lives that we allow so easily to creep in and to actually kill our joy, to kill our satisfaction, to kill our contentment. And we're going to start to pull them out and see what he describes in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, but I've got to give you a warning. And it's one of those warnings that a doctor gives you right before you're about ready to get a shot, is that this may sting just a little bit. All right? And I've got to tell you, as I've worked on this and have been churning over it myself, my goodness, there have been times where I'm like, oh man, this stings. But it's a good sting, because if we allow it to sting, it means that it's going to be doing a work on our hearts so that we don't remain the same. But you've got to be willing to be honest. If you're willing to be honest this morning, there's something that may sting, but it will be for good. It's going to be for good. So if you would, I'd encourage you to turn with me over to Ecclesiastes chapter 4. We're going to start in verse 4. And if you could turn there, whether you have a paper copy or digital copy, I think it's so important for you to look at the word for yourself. I'm going to have the words on the screen so you can follow where I'm going, but I want you to look at it for yourself. And the reason is because when you look at it for yourself, you're able to highlight, underline, circle, and do things with the text so that you can go back to it later and look at it for yourself, which is incredibly valuable. So here we go, Ecclesiastes chapter 4, starting in verse 4, and it goes like this. Then I saw that all toil and all skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and a striving after the wind. Now let's pause there for a moment. A couple of weeks ago, my wife and I had the opportunity to hang out with another couple who also has 4 kids like us. But the difference between them and us is they have a child who's a teenager and is old enough to watch the rest of the kids so that they can go on a date whenever they want. And I remember as we got home from hanging out with them, we kind of looked at each other and we were like, wouldn't that be nice? Like, wouldn't it be nice if our oldest was old enough and we could just go on a date just at a whim, like whenever we want? And we were kind of looking at them and their stage of life and we're saying, like, I kind of wish we were there. And I know some of you who are a little bit older, you're saying like, oh, you just wait. But it's one of those moments where, you know how you get that feeling of like, man, once we get to this place in life, like it's just going to be a little bit easier. It's going to be a little bit like more fun, or it's going to be just a little bit, help us to be more satisfied or content. And everyone knows that's a lie, right? Because no matter where you're at in life, you can look at someone else and you can believe the lie that if you could just have what they have, if you could just have life that looks a little bit more like theirs, then it would provide you satisfaction, happiness, and contentment. And it's just not true. Do you ever do that? Do you ever look at Instagram or Facebook or your circle of friends and family or the people that you work with and you say to yourselves, if I could just take a vacation like they could, if I could just have a salary like they have, if I could just really make money like they do, if I could be married, if I could have kids like they have kids, if I could have a house like that, if I could have the gifts and abilities that they have, you fill in the blank with whatever it is, if I could just have that, then it would help me to be more satisfied. You ever do that? Come on, be honest. Do you ever do that? Of course. Of course you do. I do it. You do it. We all do it. We have an envy that creeps up inside of us of what others have. Do you ever find yourself at a place where you're working to accomplish what others have accomplished? You're trying to achieve what others have achieved, to buy things that other people have bought. And deep down inside, if you could just have it, life would be a little bit better. And you know what Solomon says about this? Solomon says that this is a vanity. It's a striving after the wind. And it's almost as if Solomon is sitting down at a table with us, and he's looking across the table at you and me, and he's saying this. He's saying, listen, I want you to get this. That if you spend your life looking at what your neighbor has, and you fill in the blank with whatever that is that you desire, and if you spend your life envying your neighbor, I promise you this, it is going to kill your satisfaction. And what he wants us to see is that there's this thing called envy that all of us are susceptible to. And envy will kill your satisfaction. Do you know that? That when you spend the majority of your life looking around at what other people have, thinking, if only, it will kill your satisfaction. And envy is so dangerous because it is so subtle. I read this saying recently. It went like this: any friend can share your sorrows and failures, but it takes a true friend to share your joys and successes. Now, if you're willing to listen to this, there's a painful reality in that statement. Is it possible that when you see someone else succeed, that when you look at them, you may congratulate them, but there's an envy that wells up inside of you because what they've achieved or succeeded at actually makes you feel worse about yourself? Your friend gets a promotion. Your friend gets married. They get a new car. They're able to have children. They're able to travel. They're able to stay at home. They're able to have grandkids. They're able to retire. And you congratulate them. You say all the right things. But deep down inside, if you are willing to be honest, there's an aspect of their achievement, of their success, of what you're congratulating them for, that it makes you feel worse. And deep down inside, there is some envy that wells up inside of you. Now, you would never say it out loud. You may not even say it to anyone that you care or love about. But deep down inside, if you get to the innermost part of your heart, you know it's there. Rebecca DeYoung said it like this: the envious person resents another person's good gifts because they are superior to his or her own. It's not just that the other person is better, it's that by comparison, their superiority makes you feel your own lack, your own inferiority more acutely. But there's an alternative ugly side to this. And do you know what that is? It's when you see someone fail. It's when you see someone fall flat on their face and you start to think to yourself, now again, of course, you'd never say this, but deep down inside you think to yourself, well, at least I'm better than that. At least I didn't make that decision. At least I didn't go down that path. At least I'm not there financially. At least, and you fill whatever the blank is, and you look down on them because looking down on them actually puffs you up and makes you feel better about yourself. You ever do that? Why do we do that? You're like, why? Why do we do that sometimes? Why do we think like that? Why do we feel like that? And is it possible? Is it possible that deep down inside you have this longing to be noticed? You have this longing to have attention for yourself. And I told you this may sting a little bit if you're willing to be honest. You see, when you envy your neighbor, it causes life to revolve around you. When you start to envy your neighbor, it actually makes your world become really, really small and for you to look inward. And it does one of two things. Look at what he says next in verse 5. He says, the fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Verse 6, better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and striving after wind. Did you see the two extremes? The first extreme is called laziness. And laziness is actually a way of you hating your neighbors because you have nothing to give them. Everything's for yourself. Did you see what it said? It said the fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. And Solomon makes a deliberately extreme statement to illustrate the devastating effects of inverted sloth. He wants us to see that when we envy, there's this potential that leads us to looking at other people, and rather than embracing the life that God has given us and giving ourselves for the sake of others, the fool who envies gives him or herself to him or herself. And the fool looks at what others have and they envy. And deep inside, this defeatist attitude starts to well up, and little by little, they start to give over to it. And in the end, the lazy person, all that's left for them is themselves. And that won't last for long, because there's no food in the pantry. There's nothing left to eat. There's no joy. There's no contentment. There's no happiness. There's no satisfaction in that. You're brought to within yourself, and it is lonely. And you feel empty. Now, maybe there's been things that have happened to you. Hard things. You've walked through some seasons of life that have caused you to doubt, that have caused you to get angry, or maybe there's some decisions that you've made that you wish you could go back and redo. And so there are excuses that you have for why maybe you've allowed laziness to creep in and to have this envy kind of mentality that's led you to a defeatist mentality. There's plenty of reasons. But whatever it is, what it's done to you is it's caused you to go inward rather than outward. And very rarely or infrequently do you think about others. That's what envy can cause you to do. But there's another extreme to this that goes on the other side of laziness. And it's the idea of hurried busyness, this frantic way of life, where you're running from one thing to the next. And you're what Solomon says, you're a person who has two hands full of toil and a striving after the wind. This person looks at what others have and envies, and so they run from one thing to the next, trying to gain, trying to achieve, trying to accomplish, trying to build, and trying to win. And while they're doing this, they have this incredible ability to mask dissatisfaction. In the busyness of life, they've become really, really good at running after all these things. And on an outward appearance, it looks like life is going really, really well. And even the things that they've chosen to pursue and to go after, it looks as if it's for the benefit or for the sake of other people. But all that is a mask. Because on the inside, while it looks good on the outside, on the inside is this internal drive for your own agenda. There is this internal drive to build your own kingdom. And it's based off of an ego and trying to make much of yourself rather than make much of others. And when you live like this, there is a constant pressure that you put on yourself. And if you were to just get gut level honest for a moment, life has a tendency to be all about you. Now, maybe not in big ways, but in the small, everyday decisions of life. It has a tendency to start to revolve around you. And rather than seeing God as big and great, your world has become incredibly small, and it's revolving around where you're at, what you're doing, and the circumstances of your life. You want to know why I know that? Because I'm incredibly guilty. I am incredibly guilty of this. A number of years ago, I was meeting with a mentor of mine, and I was talking to him about the ministry that I was leading, and I was talking about how, man, I had all these dreams and desires and passions for what I wanted to see happen. And I was able to talk with him about where we were moving, where we were taking ground, what it was looking like. And I remember I was just so excited about all this, but at the same time, I was so burdened because I had this constant pressure. If I didn't do it, it wouldn't get done. I had to achieve, I had to accomplish, I had to drive and push. You ever felt like that before? And I remember he looked across the table at me and he said this. He said, Mark, man, I am so happy that Jesus has you on his team, because I don't know how he could get it done without you. And I remember I was like, man, that stung. But he was right. He was 100% right because I had elevated what see the key factor there? I was trying to accomplish, what I was trying to achieve, what I was going to get done, and what I could do that no one else was willing to do. And he said that to me, and it caused me to think differently. It caused a change in perspective of me, and maybe you need a change of perspective today, where you've been running around like a crazy person. And it may look like it's about others, but it's really about this internal drive that you have. Is that you today? You see, Solomon continues in verse 6 and he says, better than that laziness, better than that 2 handfuls of striving and toil, better is a handful of quietness. He wants us to see, he wants you to see that there is a better way than envy leading you to laziness or leading you to be driven for the future. He wants us to see that there is satisfaction when you can look down and have 1 handful and it's more than enough. You can look down and have 1 handful and there's no need to compare with anybody else because God is enough for you right here, right now. God is enough. And we can become quiet and find rest and find peace in all that God is, who He is, and all that He's provided in the here and now, because it doesn't matter about other people. It matters what He's provided and how we live that life out for Him and for others. Do you need to be reminded of that this morning? I know I do. I need to be reminded of this on a daily basis, a moment-by-moment basis, because my heart is so easily distracted. My desires are so easily splintered into what I want rather than what God is up to and what He's doing. Now, Solomon's going to continue in verse 7. Look at what he says. Again, I saw vanity under the sun. Verse 8, one person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? Now, one of the things that Jesus did early on in his ministry is he gathered his disciples and he sat them down on this mountain. It wasn't just the 12 disciples, but it was this large group of people that were following him. And he sat them down on the mountainside and he began to teach them about what it looked like to be a part of his kingdom. He wanted to make it crystal clear that if you are going to follow Jesus, this is what it looks like. And he began to teach and to reveal to them the secrets of the kingdom. And here's one of the things that Jesus talked about in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. He said, no one can serve 2 masters. For either you will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. You can't do it. Jesus wants to make it crystal clear. You cannot serve both God and money. And right here, Solomon, Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 7 through 8, he's introducing us to the person who's allowed money and riches to be their master. This person that he's talking about is so incredibly driven and works so hard. They make it all the way to the top. But when they get there, they're all alone. They have no children, no family, no close friends, and their only companion is their work and their wealth. They have incredibly long hours, and they obsess over their emails, meetings, and reports that they have to turn in. And when a bonus arrives, all they can think about is the next one and how it's going to be bigger and better and how they're going to raise in significance and influence based off of the wealth that they're amassing, because wealth, riches, possessions have become their God rather than God being their God. And so they are wealthy but lonely, not realizing that selfish greed will kill your satisfaction. Selfish greed will kill your satisfaction, and they haven't realized this yet. And it's so easy. It is so easy to fall into this trap of believing that in order to achieve contentment in this world, we have to attain whatever we desire. Have you ever fallen into that trap, thinking that your joy and contentment will come based off of what you attain because of what you desire? You ever fallen there? I know I have. Samuel Johnson said it like this: to be unhappy at home is the ultimate result of all ambition. Now, there's a thought, right? To be unhappy at home is the result of all ambition. Are you unhappy at home? Is it because you are so ambitious that you're actually missing out on satisfaction and what God has placed right smack dab in front of you? And you know what's incredibly dangerous about this? Is that this is so easy to see in other people. I mean, you can't make it 1 week without reading the news headline. Famous and ridiculously wealthy who's fallen. And you see their lives are in shambles. And you look at their life and you say, man, they had it all. They had all the wealth they could ever imagine. They had all the glory they could ever imagine. But yet their life lies here in ruins. And we can sit back and we can read those articles. We can look at those news headlines and literally say to ourselves, my goodness, that's so sad. At least I'm not like that. I would never get to that point. Or if I had wealth like that, I would be so different than that. Come on. Really? Would you really be different? I don't know. And what we do is we compare ourselves and we puff ourselves up, thinking that we wouldn't do the exact same thing. Now, are you willing to just take a quick look inside, to look under the hood of your life and examine that maybe, just maybe, you may not look like them, but maybe you're there today? That there is some selfish greed that's inside of you that's actually keeping you from satisfaction? Is it possible that maybe you're not there right now, but you're actually trending in that direction? And there are some decisions and some things happening in your life right now where you've become more satisfied with things rather than Him? And only you know that. Only you know what's happening inside of your heart. Only you know what you've been thinking about this past week. Only you know the decisions that you've been making. And are you trending in this direction? Do you have anyone in your life that you could ask them if they see this in you and would be willing to be honest enough to tell you the truth? And if you don't have someone in your life right now that could tell you that, I want you to know that that's a warning sign. That maybe you're headed down a path that you didn't intend to go down, but you're walking down it, and it is incredibly dangerous. And we need to remember that Solomon, he's looking in the rear view mirror of his life, and he's looking back. And one of the things that Solomon sees is that we are created to be relational beings. We're hardwired to be in community. Look at what he says in verse 9. He says, two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. Verse 10, for if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. You see, God has designed every single one of us to flourish in community. And Solomon wants his students, but he also wants us to see that we are uniquely wired to live with one another. We're not meant to live in isolation. And when we live in community, when we live with the one another, it becomes incredibly difficult to live with selfish greed. Because we are in community, we are in relationship with one another. We're not isolated to our own deceptive hearts, but our hearts are joined together so that we can hold each other accountable, so that we can encourage one another, so that we can be there for one another. And that's why here at Hill Country Bible Church, Pflugerville, we care so much about real life groups. Because in real life groups, we're given the opportunity to not live in isolation, but we're actually given an opportunity to connect relationally with one another. We're given an opportunity to grow spiritually with one another. And we're given an opportunity to live missionally with one another, to live out this mission that Jesus has called us to, that we need each other to do this. You see, the Christian life is meant to be a community project. We're meant to be with one another. And if you've not signed up for a real life group, I want you to know they start this week. Some of them start tonight. And you have a menu on one of your chairs that you could look at to sign up for a group. You can go to our website. You can go to the table out back. And we're emphasizing this because it matters. It really matters. And so if you're not involved, would you consider getting involved today? Because we want you to live out your God-given purpose for your life. And part of that purpose is living in the context of community. Now, there's one more area that Solomon is going to expose. There's one more area that he's going to invite us to kill before it kills us. Because what we're going to see is what we're going to look at next. It has the potential to kill our satisfaction. Look at what he says in verse 13. Better was a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who no longer knew how to take advice. For he went from prison to the throne, though in his own kingdom he had been born poor. I saw all the living who move about under the sun, along with that youth who was to stand in the king's place. There was no end to all the people of whom he led. Yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this is also a vanity and a striving after wind. You see, here we have a foolish king. And in his old age, he is unable to take the advice of someone else. He is stuck in his way of doing things. He's doing it the way he wants, and he is unable to listen to others. But that wasn't always the case. You see, this now king was once born into poverty. In fact, he was imprisoned at one time, and although he was imprisoned and in poverty, he was wise. And that wisdom led him to a place where he actually became king. And in that kingship, he had power, he had authority, he had influence, he had prestige. Do you ever desire that? Do you ever desire that kind of position where you have authority, where you have power, where you have prestige, and people look at you and say, my goodness. I know you're not going to admit that out loud, but do you? When I was in 6th grade, I went to my first middle school dance. And I need to warn you, I was in 6th grade with 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and I'd been working on my moves. And so I had a friend, and their parents were taking us to my mom was taking us to the dance, but then that friend's parents was going to bring us home. And I remember when we got there, I got to the school dance, and if you've ever been to a middle school dance before, there's this usual scene that happens. You walk in, and there's this group of guys that are lined up against the wall, kind of like just standing there like this, and they look tough, but they are scared out of their minds. And they're just standing there. And then there's this other group of girls. They're out in the middle, and they're just going crazy, making fools of themselves, but they're having a good time because they could care less. But then there's this other group of girls. They're in this huddle right over by the bathroom, and one of them's bawling because their boyfriend just broke up with them. It's this crazy scene, if you've never seen it. It's crazy. But I remember I walked in, and all my buddies were up against the wall, and I'm like, what are they doing? That doesn't look like any fun. And so I got out in the middle of the dance floor, and I just started doing whatever I was doing in 6th grade. And I thought it was awesome. But then all of a sudden, something happened. The music went from this fast pace where I was able to move around. All of a sudden, it got really quiet and really slow. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't know what to do right now. I've never experienced this before. And there was a girl named Sarah who was in 7th grade. And she walked over to me, and she said, Mark, would you like to dance? And I said, yes. And then she did something I didn't know what to do with. She started to put her arms around me. And so I just thought I'd follow her, and I put my arms around her. And then she started to do what I like to call the penguin. And we just started going like this. And my eyes were really big. I didn't know what to do, but this is what we were doing. And it was awesome. I remember looking over at my friends, and I went, and so there we are, just going back and forth. And all of a sudden, the song ended. We went our separate ways. I went over to my buddies, and I was like, did you see that? I go home that night. I get into my house. I open up the front door, and I just kind of start walking through. My mom comes around the corner because her sweet 6th grade boy, 12 years old, has just gone to his first dance. And she goes, sweetie, honey, how was it? And I said, Mom, I was irresistible. To this day, she doesn't like me to live that down. She still likes to bring that up every once and again, and I don't appreciate that. Not one bit. But do you ever have a desire like that? Come on, maybe I was in 6th grade, but I think that still wells up in all of us, this desire to be irresistible, to be prestigious, to be known, to have a name for ourselves. Like I think somewhere deep down inside of us, and it manifests itself in all different kinds of ways, but we all have this desire. And what Solomon wants us to see, and he wants this to be so clear because of the destructive nature of it, is that his warning is that when you pursue power and prestige, when you pursue it, when you desire it, when you go after it, it will kill your satisfaction, because that's what pursuing power and prestige does. When it becomes your focus, when it becomes what you worship, it will ultimately kill your satisfaction. If this is the motivation of your heart, it's going to destroy you. Look at what happened to the king in this story. He went from being imprisoned, poor, humble, yet wise, to becoming powerful, prestigious, but then ultimately he became proud and obsolete. He's forgotten. He's moved on from. He made a name for himself only for his name to be forgotten. His striving, what he was going after, became meaningless, and his purpose in life ultimately folded because it was built on the foundation of himself. He wanted to be great, but he lost himself in the pursuit. Do you ever long to be great? Do you ever have that longing to be great? I don't think Jesus is surprised by that longing that we have to be great. In fact, he wrote about it and he talked about it with his disciples. Look at what he said in Matthew 20, 25 through 28. He said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them." Verse 26, "It shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Do you see the connection? Do you want to find satisfaction? Do you see the connection? If you want to find satisfaction, then you need to become small, and for God to be huge and large for all that he is. Do you want to find satisfaction? Then your perspective needs to change. For you to see God in all that he is, and for you to see yourself in light of who you really are because of who he is. Do you want to have joy? Do you want to have meaning? Do you want to have happiness in your life? Of course you do. Of course I do. That's why the Apostle Paul said this to the church in Philippi in chapter 2, verse 2. He said, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. If you want to find joy, if you want to find satisfaction, verse 4, let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interest of others. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus. This is yours. If you're in Christ Jesus, this mind is yours. You see, Solomon, Jesus, and the Apostle Paul are saying the exact same thing. Envy, selfish gain or greed, pursuing power and prestige are the exact opposites of finding joy and satisfaction. And is it possible? Is it possible that you've been missing out on life, real life, because you've been going after the wrong things? Is it possible that you have a longing deep inside of you that has not been filled because you've been running after the wrong things? And if that's true here today, would you be honest? Would you be willing to admit it? To be able to root out this thing that's actually killing your satisfaction? And would you be willing to consider Jesus just for a moment? Would you just look at Jesus for a moment? Look at what Paul goes on to say in verse 6. He says, Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form. He, Jesus, humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. That's what he was willing to go through. But then it says this, look at verse 9. Therefore, because of what he was willing to go through, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Now, I just want to take a moment, and I want to talk to two groups of people in the room right now. Just a moment. And if you're someone who is here today, and you've been investigating God, you've been trying to discern if he's really real, like if you can really trust him. You have questions. And in the middle of your questions, you've had this pursuit in your life. And maybe, just maybe for the first time, you realize today that you've actually been going after the wrong things. You've been going after the things you think would satisfy. You've been envying other people. You've been comparing yourself to other people and allowing yourself either to be built up or brought low based off of what you see in other people, and it's left you empty. Or maybe you've been trying to amass wealth for yourself. You've been trying to think, if I could just get this, if I could just earn this, if I could just achieve this, and you've been working so hard. You've been going after all these things, and what you've realized is there's still this emptiness. There's this longing inside of you, because what happens for you is you get to the next thing and it doesn't satisfy. So you go to the next thing, and then you go to the next thing, and it's left you in a place where you're at today, and you feel lonely. You feel empty, because the weight of your life has gone into things that will never satisfy. Or maybe for you, you've been working so hard to build a name for yourself, thinking that if you could be known, if you could be noticed, if you could be recognized for something, if people would know who you are, then you would find satisfaction. But what you've come to realize is that the more you go after it, the more fleeting it actually is, that it doesn't actually satisfy. And you keep feeling this emptiness inside. I want you to know that if that's you today, it's not an accident that you're here. And although you've been pursuing those things, God has been pursuing you. He loves you that much that in the midst of your pursuit after those things, he wasn't done with you. In fact, he sent his son Jesus to die in your place so that you could have real life. And today, if you would be willing just to say, I'm sorry, God. I'm sorry for going after all these things that don't satisfy. And you would turn to him and say, God, would you forgive me? You know what he does? He forgives you. And not only does he forgive you, but he places his spirit inside of you. And it's a guarantee of your satisfaction for eternity that you can experience right here, right now, because you have his son. And you have it now, and you have it for eternity. And because of that, you get to see him in a new way. Is that you today? Are you tired of running? Are you tired of trying? Are you tired of wanting to achieve and earn more? God's calling you to himself. At the end of our time together, we're going to have some elders and their wives up front, and they would love to pray with you and talk with you about how you can enter into this relationship. And you can do it right now, just from talking to God right in your seat. Man, he loves you. But I want to talk to another group of people just for a moment. And you're the person who's maybe been a follower of Jesus for a period of time. And if you would just be honest for a moment this morning, you have allowed into your life these interior motives that are actually distracting you from God. And for a season of your life, you've been going after things that other people have, thinking that if you got that, then you'd be satisfied. You've allowed yourself to think that power and prestige, money and fame and acclaim would bring you success and satisfaction. You think that those things, and you know that's not true, but there's been this war. There's been this battle that's been going on inside of you, and you're just exhausted from it. If that's you today, and you're honest and willing to say it, would you just be willing to tell Jesus you need his help? That you're sorry and that you need his help? To redirect your heart, to redirect your motives, to redirect your mind. Would you be willing to look at him and say, Jesus, I need you to help me to live and to love like you live and loved. Jesus, I need your help to find satisfaction by actually becoming low and becoming a servant like you were a servant. Jesus, I need your help to stop having me as the center of my universe and have you as the center of my universe so that life can have meaning and purpose because it's found in you and not me. Is that you today? Have you become so consumed with yourself rather than serving him and living out his life for you? There's a group of small house churches up in northern New Jersey. And in these house churches, there's a plaque, there's a sign in the house that simply says this: everybody wants a revolution, but nobody wants to do the dishes. And what that sign is saying is simply this, is that everyone wants to be a part of something great. Everyone wants to make a name for themselves. Everyone wants a revolution so that they're known and noticed for it, but no one really wants to get low and to serve like Jesus served, to humble themselves and do the dishes. And maybe the next step for you today, rather than trying to make a name for yourself, is to simply go home and start by doing the dishes. That maybe for you to become great means that you actually need to get small and low and become a servant so that your mind and your heart can have a trajectory of its life changed to be able to live in love like Jesus lived in love. Is that you today? Would you be willing to humble yourself and ask him that? Would you pray with me? Father, we come to you in this moment right now. And God, we thank you for your incredible love towards us. God, I want to pray right now, if there is someone here that doesn't know you, would you help them to see that you've been pursuing them with your love? Would you help them to see that all the things that they've been chasing after will not satisfy, but you do? God, I want to pray for all the people who've been followers of you, but they've gotten distracted. They've been going after these other things. God, would you in your mercy cause them to see you for all that you are? Would you help us to become great by becoming small? Because we want to be a part of your kingdom. We want to be a part of what you're doing because there's nothing like it. So God, would you do that in our presence here right now? Would you help us? We need you. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.